Hello believers, and Happy New Year to you. Hope you've had a good festive period, and hopefully that rest period is still going on for you. I had some great gifts, including 2 bottles of aftershave, just to mask that tired dad pong that started to emanate from me in the last couple of years. It is a beautiful day here in Scotland, just blowing the cobwebs off. I'm currently trying to walk to a place called the Ruined Temple of Decision. And hopefully that won't be a bad decision for me. The rest of the family have turned back to get to the car, but I found myself drawn towards places that sound like terrible black metal albums. Just to give you an update on the year ahead for Believe Me, we'll be having a mid-season break early February after episode 12. And then we're back again late March 2024 for the second half of season 1. So loads more stuff and brilliant guests to look forward to in that time. As always, thank you to them for coming on and sharing the stories, and thank you to you for listening. Anyway, before I get totally out of breath, I'm going to move on to today's guest. It's the British comedian. Is he happy with British? I'll have to ask him that. Londoner, let's say Londoner. A London-based comedian, Nathaniel Metcalfe. Nathaniel is a totally unique comic voice, both in terms of his delivery and his material. Hopefully you managed to catch one of his wonderfully constructed hour shows in the last couple of years, or you've maybe heard him on various podcasts and radio shows, including Nick and Nat's Fan Club and recently James Acaster's Springleaf. Nathaniel was once wryly described by another high-profile comedian as the most influential comic of his generation, and I'm sure if you ask a good majority of the UK comedy industry, they would get behind that statement. Nat is always a joy to spend time with, and I hope you enjoy spending time with him as much as I do. We speak about how he writes, being true to yourself, perseverance, and we also get on to speaking about season 1, episode 8, entitled Ice. If you like the show, please do like and subscribe and drop us a line at believemepod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. Hope 2024 is going to be a good year for you, whatever you're up to. Don't know if you've made any resolutions yet. Think big. Think big and have a crack. Anyway, without further ado, here's Nathaniel, and a Happy New Year to you all.
I feel a bit like I'm waiting for something to happen at the minute,
Right.
but I don't know how much I'm doing to make things happen. I'm sort of making plans. I like the idea of doing more stand-up.
Great.
And I'm making little notes, but none of it, like, of the little notes I've made, it feels like maybe like 40 seconds, I reckon, is about serviceable to the level of how I'd like it to be.
Yeah, well, it's 59 minutes and 60 to go then.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I reckon about 40 seconds is pretty good.
Yeah.
I think, perhaps because there's something missing in my life, Chris, but I think, like, I haven't really done much stand-up since the pandemic. And then I was in a really nice place pre-pandemic where I didn't have an agent anymore, but I seemed to be at a sort of level where I just get asked to do things.
Sure.
And it was like a really sort of, it felt like enough. And there was I didn't know I was in this sort of quite nice period that I was in then, where I'd be getting, so it felt like I'm not remotely well known in stand-up, except I'd sort of have a bit, like, people had seen me. So it would just be occasionally just get asked to do gigs and things. And it would be regular enough if there was something that felt a bit risky, I'd do a bunch of open mic leading up to it, or sort of smaller gigs. And sometimes it'd just be like, I think some people, I mean, I think perhaps I always occupied a funny space where I think some people seem to think I'm quite successful and other people know I'm not.
Right.
So you get asked to do things where you'd be like, can you headline my club in Bristol? Can you headline my club? And it'd always be like in other cities, and you'd be like, headline?
Yeah.
So headline these small clubs. And they were kind of really nice because it usually meant that the promoter had some kind of idea of who you were and liked you. And I was sort of doing a lot of that. I mean, I guess I've always done that to an extent, but that seemed to be the majority of what I was doing up until sort of pandemic times.
Yeah, because I remember you saying one of the issues with that, when you did have the agent, was you get sent off to places, and it'd feel like not hard work, but you'd be on bills with vastly different people, and they just, not that people wouldn't get it, but it'd be like, oh, right, I've come here to the arse end of nowhere, and then to do 10 minutes for what,
Yeah, and it felt like you got to that point where I'd done me kind of middle spots in clubs. So I was kind of like proven. And as a middle spot, what I do kind of worked really well because it's a bit different, but it's not different enough. But it's probably different from whoever's opening and the headliner. There's still a headliner to come. So even if you're not that into it, or it's a bit too unusual for you, there's someone coming along in a bit who you'll definitely like more. So it always felt like that was a real sweet spot. But as you kind of graduated them, and I'd sort of become an opener at gigs. And that, I think, I used to find tough. Because when you're trying to set up what the night is, it always felt like it could go wrong. It was more likely to go wrong if I was an opener, because you're sort of setting the tone, but it's probably just ever so slightly too unusual. And actually, I think this probably happened far less than I think it did, if you know what I mean. I think probably more often than not, it worked pretty well. The times it didn't work were when I just think, this is what the problem is. And other people had mentioned it to me. They said that it's difficult to do something, not that I'm particularly unusual, but it's almost like you can headline or you can be a middle spot.
Right.
You've got to get through this point where you're opening the night. And then it almost felt like you could feel people going, what's this? This is weird. Where it's almost like what I think what a lot of audiences want, and fair enough, is probably a sort of a safer pair of hands that feels quite straightforward and they know what they're getting.
Is that one of the reasons that you started doing like comparing more then, or is that just something you fancy doing more of?
I barely ever did that. I only really did that at my own nights. And I was able to do that by just completely setting the tone myself. But to do that, I had to make it completely my night. So it probably wouldn't. So then it didn't really work if I try and transfer that to someone else's show.
Right.
Because it would be like it feels a bit like I'm in charge,
Right.
If I'm not in charge, kind of didn't work. So I never really liked comparing, never really got into it. And always found it tricky. In hindsight, I think I probably should have just persevered and done more with it. So then that was when I was doing those gigs. And then I think I kind of just got a bit disillusioned with the whole thing of it, or just trying to, I wasn't really making enough money, but I was making some money and I still had a full-time job. And it meant that I was kind of working too hard. And there was a point where I thought, I'm actually doing all right now. But it more felt like I had two full-time jobs, neither of which paid a good wage, but together was all right.
Yeah.
So I was a bit like, I just need to do stuff I have to think about it. So I did, the last Edinburgh show I did was in 2018. And after that, I kind of had this, what I guess was a nice kind of 18 months or so, where I just wasn't really pursuing gigs, but I'd sort of have enough people would always come along and I'd always get asked to do things. And that was a really kind of nice time. And it was more that show was kind of me trying to do something where, well, if I'm not trying to make money and I want to do it, then the reason for doing it is doing it a bit like, treating it a bit like like it is an art form, or I'm trying to make a thing.
Sure.
So then I was much more in the headspace of, and that show in particular felt much more like I've written 60 minutes. I haven't written something that I can pull anything out of. And I think in hindsight, that happened with the second show I wrote as well, where as soon as I'm trying to write shows, I'm not really writing shows that feel like they can have chunks taken out of them.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so I mean, not to get into too brass tacks about it, but how do you do it? How are you like? What is the writing process that you're doing? Are you writing it out all long form? You know, you mentioned writing notes, but do you write it like a novel or a short story and then memorize it? Or and how do you like workshop it? You know, how do you, if there aren't chunks that could come out at gigs, you know, how for want of a better word, how do you know if it works or not?
There are, yeah, so that's true actually. Almost like this is a good way of thinking about it, because there actually always were. Because I just go to gigs that would be like new material gigs, where I would like. In fact, what's probably true is they probably would work. I find new material nights really, I always found them terrifying.
Yeah.
I found it much easier to lean on old stuff. And when I force myself not to, I don't find the process fun. I find it always feels like I'm shortchanging people, and I hate doing it. But I would do it when I was doing a show, and I'd just try and it actually doing it helps those bits in the show get better.
Yeah.
Just because you go, this bit doesn't work. But because you're doing it in front of an audience, you probably will make it funnier because of the pressure of knowing that and because I hate it so much, it probably means I will really concentrate on this 10-minute section of something, and I'll go, right, this bit's got to be funny. Or it's not allowed to not be funny.
Yeah, I mean, I always found that even if it was a new material night, there was still an element of like, yeah, but we're all doing as best, aren't we? Or
yeah,
we're all like, not that any other acts made me feel like this, but when I was doing it, it was almost like, you know, people are still watching and other acts are still watching, and there's a difference between good new material and bad new material. And there's no way you could just come up and vamp it, you know, for 10
No,
for 10
I mean,
minutes.
some people can, I think. I think that you probably can reach a level of nirvana when you're doing it, that you probably can do that. And I think some acts are probably just better at doing that stuff. And I think that's another thing where, I think that's another skill that comparing has, where you are just left up there with nothing to say and just having to kind of essentially improv your way through something, which I've never done. And I'm much more, like you say, I will probably at some time if I'm writing a show, I will write it all out. And that usually comes because it's a way I can tell myself that I'm writing it as well.
Right.
So if I've got rather than stare at a blank screen, I'd rather start typing out what I would say. And what would usually happen was I'd usually do it, I'd write it, and they're really short. They're about 7,000 or 8,000 words when I write them out. And I talk very slowly on stage. Because of that, they only have to be 7,500 to 8,000 words long.
And, you know, 2 pages for laughter.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I leave those blank. But I probably will. I'll always end up doing that. And there's a lot of cutting and pasting and changing. And it's a bit like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've never tried to write anything else. I've never tried to write a novel. But I imagine I probably would work in a very similar way. Or I think about it in those terms more than I think about it as comedy. I'm writing a story. So I'm always trying to write a narrative. And there's usually, I'll start with one thing. If I can find a device that I can lean something on, it's always much easier.
Yeah.
And the last show I did was called Chameleon, Comedian, Corinthian, and Caricature, which I always thought was one of those, which was in David Bowie's song called The Bewley Brothers. And I always thought that would be a brilliantly pretentious Edinburgh show type.
Yeah.
And it was only when I was looking at it, it was going, well, I do have that thing about a chameleon. And then suddenly you go, oh, okay. And one of them is comedian, and you're doing a comedy show.
Yeah.
And you go, so then you go, right, so now I need Corinthian and caricature, and I've got a show.
Yeah.
And it was just that. You just look at it and you go, right, that's the title. And it was I wrote it in 2016, and it was all that thing where I wrote it right in the aftermath of David Bowie dying.
Yeah.
And it just felt, all right, I've got this. I've got this thing about Bowie. So it just starts writing itself. So suddenly you've got this sort of structure about what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to do that show where I wanted to try and make it like a real person. That was the idea behind it. So I wanted to be like, whereas I liked my other shows that I'd done, but I think it always felt like the persona was like a cartoon. But then it was more like the things I would say in it often sound silly and trivial. But then I think I worried that they sounded cartoonish and at worst not true.
Right.
Whereas actually they're all true. And it's not none of the stuff I talked about was made up. But I'm sort of talking about things that have happened to me, filtered through a persona, which is a sort of sillier version of me, I guess, or slightly more naive version. And I worried that it felt like, is it obvious that what I'm saying are real things? Or have I essentially... The second show I wrote was about following someone who looked like Alan Davis but wasn't Alan Davis.
Yeah.
And I felt like, this sounds all made up. And I think by the end, I kind of go to some lengths to prove that all this stuff is true.
Yeah.
And I like that about it. But I worried that also when I spoke to people, Nick Helmont said the thing that was weird about my stand-up that he thought was that he always said that in stand-up you can talk about absolutely anything in the world. You can talk about absolutely anything. But he said, what's weird about you is the stuff you choose to talk about. And he goes, that is right. And it's like, and when you think of it that way, you go, you're right.
Yeah.
That is weird.
Right.
The fact that out of anything I can talk about, I'm not, I'm certainly not like, I'm a truth teller. I'm going to, it's more that I will choose to talk about very trivial things and silly things. And I think so when I did the third show, I just wanted it to be a bit more like, I wanted to try and do it like I've been doing it. I didn't want to come out and do like I'm a completely different persona or anything. I just wanted to do it and try and make out from the start that I am a real person.
Yeah, right.
That was the whole point of it. And because that was it, that ended up being what a caricature was. So you start going, oh yeah, I'm like a caricature of myself. I'm like a kind of, on stage I'm like a caricature. I don't even know how well this came across, but it was more that I was trying to do that, like, I'm saying these things, but I am a real person.
Yeah, right.
And these things have happened to me.
Are you, are you looking, is that just you sort of in a silo on your own, or do you feel like anyone's given you license to do that? Into, I suppose the questions about influencers, but, have you always thought, well, this makes me laugh, or I find this funny. So, and I'm going to find the people who do find this funny. Or have you gone, well, I've watched this person growing up and, because I think we've talked about lots of, for want of a better word, old school comedians and, those storytelling comedians. But is there any people specifically you kind of look to and you go, well, my comedy and my stand-up voice is that person with this person and a bit of this person?
No. But that's interesting. Definitely consciously, when I did my second show, I had a real panic about it because I got an agent the Christmas after my first show, and she said, "Oh, what are you planning to do next?" And I said, "I don't know really." And she said, "Well, you have to follow up your first Edinburgh show within a year."
Oh, right.
And I went, "Oh, okay, all right." And in my head, I sort of knew that was true. I knew that was a good bit of advice, but I also felt like, but it's Christmas now, and
yeah,
I've got to write a show in like 4 months or 3 months or something. and I had a real panic and I had a meltdown. And I think that I never really had a good sense of what I did on stage. And I said to her, I said, what do I do?
Yeah.
So what do I do? What's one of my shows like? And she said, oh, well, your last show kind of reminded me of the kind of thing that Dave Gorman used to do.
Right.
And I went, right. And then I watched everything I could find of Dave Gorman.
Right.
And I consciously tried to go, and I'd see it. And I hadn't really watched a lot of Dave Gorman stuff. I had seen like these, he had a TV show of the one, I don't know if the TV show is called Are You Dave Gorman, or the one where he's looking for other Dave Gormans.
Yeah.
But when she said that, I went, great. And so at that point, so in January 2014, I watched loads of Dave Gorman and went, oh, I know what she means. She means this. So I was trying to find out what the overlap Venn diagram was between what she was thinking I did and what Dave Gorman did.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder, has that come from her thinking, what is the most alternative but sellable thing?
Maybe.
That they could sell to, Portsmouth, mirth control in Portsmouth, I don't know. I'm putting words in her mouth. But.
No, maybe that was it. So in that, I consciously went, right, I'm just going to watch Dave Gorman stuff, and I got it. And I got a thing where it's like rather than go, right, I'm going to make a Dave Gorman show, I sort of identified what the crossover was. Although having said that, the next show I wrote was the one about looking for someone who looked a bit like Alan Davis who wasn't Alan Davis, which is very Dave Gorman-y.
Yeah.
It feels like it has that sort of overlap. That was the first time I consciously was trying to emulate something by trying to find out what the common ground was, because someone else had identified it. I had a thing where I couldn't. This is fairly recently as well, that I said that of our generation of comedians, this might even have been in lockdown or something. It was not that long ago. I sort of had this realization of the people that were most successful. If you think of them as, if you think of like Josh and Ramesh, you'd go, right, well those two people have and always did have such well-defined personas.
Yeah.
That it becomes like, oh, that's how you can hear their voice. You know how they would approach something. And I went, oh, that must be a brilliant way of writing. Because I found writing so tough that as soon as you know what your persona is, it must make writing so much easier.
Yes, and I guess if you're their level as well, I don't know if Josh or Ramesh have writers, but it makes, if they're going to bring on other writers at their level, it makes things easier to write for, I guess. If you know you need to write some material for this grumpy persona.
Yeah, because you can hear their voices in your head. Yeah. You know the kind of things they would say or the way they would say it and the sort of rhythm of how they'd say things. And I went, oh, yeah, that's it. And I'd spoken to David Trent about it. And I said, I think the problem I have is that I don't have a well-defined persona. And David Trent was like, what are you talking about? Of course you do. Right. And I went, oh, right, maybe I do. And I think that's been my problem. I've never been in touch with what my persona is. I'm always kind of thinking of it like, how does the third person, Nat Metcalfe, how would he say this?
Yeah.
How would he talk on stage? So I'd always find that writing a bit difficult. If I was doing it, I tend to have a thing where I open receptors. When I was doing stand-up much more, my receptors are on all the time, and they are just almost like everything that happens in my life. I have got like little radars on my head that try and pick up absolutely anything from overheard conversation to just watching something. Like if you see something weird or someone does something weird, you go, what's that? What are they doing? What have they said? And then that's when I'm kind of, at that point, I think that is the easiest way of me writing things. Plus, for like 8 years, I did Josie Long's gig.
Yeah.
And I had to do a new 10-ish minutes every month. And that was brilliant for that because it meant that you had to come up with something.
Yeah.
Plus, it was always a really nice audience, so it felt like they would be quite forgiving if it wasn't great. Including one time, one of my favourite ones I did was I became quite... I started to take it a bit for granted, I think, or just knew it'd be nice. So you'd have this confidence like, this will be all right. So when I was doing that and I'd be writing a show, I would know I could take 10 minutes from the show up there every month, as long as it was different. And that was really nice. So I could do everything that was in a show. And plus, you'd probably end up doing, in theory, if I was doing 10 minutes, you're technically making 2 hours worth. So really, you'd only have to keep 50% of that for it to work.
Right, yes.
And it was a nice audience, so it felt like you could push it. And I think occasionally I did push it. And there was one time I came up and I was trying to do a thing about how Nico and the Velvet Underground, but Nico sounds like Richard Wilson. And that was it. And I went up there with this idea and I was trying to talk through this idea. And as I was talking through it and it wasn't getting laughs, I started laughing in a way that I don't normally. It's very unprofessional, but I started laughing. And while I was laughing, that was the thing that kind of made it work because it made the audience laugh. And I just kept saying, I'm sorry, this isn't good enough. But I found it funny as if and then you play off the idea of this isn't good enough.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I brought this idea. It's not strong enough for 10 minutes.
Brilliant. I mean,
but just on that, in the morning, you're going, yeah, this is it. This is a great idea.
Yeah. And sort of, just like cruise on for 10 minutes on that, that initial 10 minutes of laughter. Yeah.
Oh, I can do that. I can get away with it. And you realise straight away that everyone's like, oh yeah, go on. And you go, no, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
I remember you just reminded me of a Leicester Comedy Festival one year, and for some inexplicable reason, I'd been booked to do like 9 p.m. in one of the main halls on a Saturday night with my work in progress show, and I thought, just through sort of force of ego, that I thought this will be fine, this will be all right. I'll just really sell it, And it was horrible. It was a real car crash. But I remember
what was the venue?
Oh God, it's in that hotel. So it's like
is it called Belmont Hotel or something?
Yeah.
Oh, I had exactly the same experience, but I did it as a kind of I did it following Edinburgh.
Right.
So the February following Edinburgh, I went, I'm going to do my old show again in Edinburgh, which had gone down really well. And so I had this sort of confidence in it of being a good show. And the last time I ever did it was I think it was at Belmont Hotel.
Yeah.
The Mae Martin was on directly before me and had the kind of, I saw the last sort of 15 minutes of her show. And she just attracted the sort of the nicest kind of loveliest audience you could have.
Yeah.
And I watched it and go, look at these guys. I'm going to have a great time. Look at these guys. And then they all filtered out and my lot came in.
Yeah. People who couldn't get tickets to Mae Martin.
Yeah. And these guys just turned up and I was like, oh no. And I went for it and it just was like, I could see I was just staring at blank faces for an hour with a show that I thought was pretty at that point. This is pretty good. This is a pretty good show. I've done it. People liked it.
It just reminded me because it was like I did one joke and finished it, and then someone shouted out, and then what? I was like, no. Anyway, we'll move on. Here's some fromage, right?
But it's generally, I've never gone back. Yeah. I've never gone back to Leicester. I just found it I found it so dispiriting, and I went, no, I can't handle this. If this is Leicester comedy, I'm out. I never went back.
So you were talking about you said you speak to some people and they think you are doing well and you're successful. What in your mind is you being successful then? Is it being, for want of a better word, like a full-time being able to do full-time stand-up? And do you want to do anything? Do you want to write other stuff? Or, when you think about being successful, what is that?
Well, it's weird because it's always felt like I've never had the time to know what I would do with it, if you know what I mean. And I used to always say, like, I just want to be able to do this thing. I'd had a meeting with a different agent who didn't become my agent. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do this show that I've been writing. And then she said, what else do you want to do? And I was like, I just want to do this show that I've been writing. Yeah. And you realise in hindsight, what a terrible thing to have said. And she said, do you want to do acting? And I went, I don't know if I'm good enough for that. And then afterwards, when I explained this to people, they said, they don't mean they're going to say, right, King Lear tonight, you're the lead. He goes, what they're saying is, do you want to like pull a face or shrug on an advert for like Shake and Vac or something? Yeah. It's like, right, of course, that's what they mean. And I think I'd always be very dismissive because I'd always be like, oh, no, I just want to do this show. That's my focus. And it's also like, because I've always had jobs at the same time, I've either had full-time jobs or part-time jobs working alongside it. It's always had this thing of, I only have time I can't commit to doing loads of things. So I need to do one thing well. And once I can do that thing well, I know how much time I've got left. But it'd be the idea of like, when I was working at Gosh or something, the idea of me being able to do anything else but trying to write a show at once, it was already pretty overwhelming and pretty and it'd just be any kind of free time, evenings and weekends would be like essentially kind of ruined because I'd be trying to write a show.
I guess that's why you find, that's across the arts though, isn't it? Because it's like why there's a total dearth of working people in the arts. And I've seen it myself through work recently where short film schemes are being set up, and it's you read the blurbs, and it's like we want to attract working class people and a range of backgrounds and diversities, but it's not, the course is set up or the scheme's set up which in a totally exclusionary way, because it's like even if it's only let's say a couple of £1,000 to do the course, that's still a major chunk of money if you're struggling to eat.
Oh yeah.
And or you're caring for somebody, and that's even if you let's say, I was thinking of it, some kid living on a council estate in Doncaster, what is the route into you being a filmmaker or a comedian or an artist or something? It's like it's just not there, is it? It's like I'll go and I'm gonna have to do a job. That's what. And then if it does strike you later off in life that comedy or something rears its head and you think, I'll try that, like it's like you're saying, you've still got your job to do. It's like you still got to eat. It's like it's a luxury to be able to do that.
And in a way, I think it gets worse. And I think in hindsight, I kind of think often about how lucky I was really in being the age I was doing it. I think so much of it is completely too expensive now. Something now like Edinburgh strikes me as like, I don't know how I would be able to afford to do it. Mm-hmm. It just would seem. And before I'd kind of, I'd probably break even and maybe make a little bit of money, but not loads, and you kind of hope someone would come off it. But just the idea of I just think you'd be signing up to put yourself into debt now. So things like that as well, that makes it difficult for me at the minute, because I don't know what the end product is. I don't know what I'm aiming for. If I'm thinking, am I trying to write something that will become an Edinburgh show, or am I writing something that I won't be able to do as an Edinburgh show? Or are Edinburgh shows different now? Do you go up for a week? In which case, if you go up for a week, are you writing a show that you'll probably perform 5 or 6 times? And is it worth the effort and the energy that goes into it? So that's kind of what I'm struggling with, just the motivation to do it, because it feels so like almost like silly, like a mad errand to do if you then try and write a show. I think I shouldn't. I should probably try and. I think ideally, what I'd like to try and do is, I would like to write a show, but I think what I'd like to do is try and write proper stand-up, like what stand-ups do, and probably not what I was doing. If you know,
right?
I'd quite like to have a go at like, can I just write something that's fairly accessible and fairly like straightforward, or can I not do that because? And I think every time I've thought that's what I'll do, I'll then, as soon as I start writing it, it's like, well, that's not it, is it? That's specifically exactly what you would have done before.
Right, yeah.
But maybe that's actually what I do, whatever that is. That thing what I did, that's what I do.
Is it always going to be something that you're going to want to do you think?
That's what I worry about. I don't know, because I always think it's interesting talking to you, and you always seem to be, when you stop doing stand-up, you just seem completely at peace with it. And I'd be like, oh, right, yeah. So when I'd see people, like I always felt like I'd see, and there's lots of comedians we know who are doing it long after they seem to be enjoying it.
Right, yeah.
And you just go like, I mean, you're not even enjoying this. You're not getting anything out of this. And it always felt like there was an element to it where if I would do it, I could always point at something and go, well, I'm definitely more successful, or I'm doing better, or I'm doing these gigs I wasn't able to do last year. And you could see this progression until there was a point where you just went, I either kind of Harry carried that, or I just kind of went, I don't think. There was a point where it felt, after my second Edinburgh show, I remember talking to my then agent about it. And her advice was, yeah, just do another one next year. And I said, no, this is what you said last year. It just feels like that idea.
Yeah.
I think actually, I don't think that's bad advice. I think that's actually there is something to that. I really love like people like Stuart Laws, who just seem to have gone back and done it. And sometimes they'll do a show for a week, and sometimes they'll do a full show.
Yeah.
And I go, God, I actually really like that, and thinking of it in those terms. But actually just sort of persevering with it, that to me felt like a madness. Like, I can't just do another show immediately. I can't just wipe out another year on the trot to try and write another show. But in my head, I thought, well, maybe I could take a year off. And that year off became 4 years off from writing a new show.
Yeah.
Although I think I'd basically written it within about 2. But then again, it's just that kind of thing, finding the confidence or the idea of doing it again at Edinburgh. I think I did it at Mac in 2016. And actually in that time, I had like an aborted show as well, which I think about a lot. Like I aborted it in about February.
Is this Dark Metcalfe?
Yeah, it kind of was. It was weird. It was called No Milk. It was called No Milk Today, and I was going to do a thing.
That's got to come out. It's got to come somehow.
And then it just like, but all that stuff was bleak. I did bits of it at Mac, and it was bleak, and people didn't like it. And I went, yeah, I don't know if I like it. I think people didn't like seeing it. I think it was too sad.
Right.
I think it was too like bleak. But I thought it was like quite funny. It was about it was all this stuff about like why do people cry? What's the point of crying? So it was all material about that. Like,
brilliant.
What is crying? What's the point? At what point at a low ebb do you need water to come out your eyes? Who's that helping? It's that kind of like, it's that sort of, and there was this whole thing about crying over spilt milk, and that was it. There was this thing about milk that was working, and it all felt like, there were all things dusting together that felt like, if I had just pursued it, it felt like I would have had another show in 2015 that would have had lots of weird connections to milk and crying milk, and it was going to have a magic trick in it, I remember. I can't remember why, but I decided I was going to learn how to do some magic tricks and actually just do them.
Oh my God, it's so good. I could just see it. It's such a good title. You'd do it like, the poster would be something like Saturday night, Sunday morning, proper like northern sort of 60s industrial bleak around. I can just see it now. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, that needs to happen somehow.
I don't know. It's more like, it's very much in the past now. It feels, and I quite like and I took tiny elements of that and there's like a sort of, there's maybe about 10% of that ended up in the next show I did. But I do kind of regret it because I could feel it going somewhere. And it was kind of about bleak it was about like the end of things and about like, so there was all this stuff about the end of the 60s, the Altamont, Jimi Hendrix. I can't even remember. I remember at the time there was like loads of factors that they almost coalesced into something. It was about crying milk. It was going to have a magic trick in it that I was just going to do as a kind of thing that you'd just do a magic trick as almost because I was thinking of it in the terms of like the Prestige film. That I often think of my shows like that. You're trying to go. I always go, "What's the Prestige?" And I went, "But what if you just do a magic trick?"
Yeah, fantastic.
What if you just do one and you don't tell people that's what you're doing, and at the end you've basically achieved the thing that people go, "I don't know how he did that."
Yeah,
and that was the thing. So it was gonna be sort of, it was all very dairy based, crying milk and doing weird sort of, I don't know what it was, a very odd idea, but it was all about like the end of the 60s, the end of the kind of hippie dream, and the end of and I had a thing about the end of the 90s and being represented by men behaving badly coming to an end, and have that as if like this is the 90s with this kind of this other sort of tragic end of the 90s, ending with like 9/11 being this kind of this sort of full stop on the 90s, and the Altamont concert being the end of the 60s, and having these kind of eras that are very celebrated and people look back on with this great nostalgia, and how they have these kind of bleak full stops on them. That was the thing. It's going to be called No Milk Day, and I worked on it for a little while, but then it was almost like I just couldn't get. I think the problem with it is I genuinely couldn't get any laughs out of it, which is the main thing. I just was like, I don't think anyone finds this funny. I maybe should have abandoned it and made a play, done like a one-man play or something. So it really wasn't like, it felt like everyone was like, it felt like it made people cross their arms. It's weird. I don't think about the X-Files at all anymore. And when you spoke to me about doing this, I was like, oh yeah, the X-Files, sure.
Yeah.
And it just feels like one of those things that's already happened. And yeah, I completely forgot how into the X-Files I was. I was just in the last week, I've gone, and watching the episode, I was going, God, I forgot. I loved this so much. I was really into the X-Files. And I remember it starting, and I remember the ads for it on BBC Two. It was quite heralded. And I remember there was like the guy who was doing the voiceover for the ad referred to him as David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson in the X-Files. And I remember going, who? But they're almost like spoken of as if they were massive stars.
Right.
And I think in my mind, it always felt related to Twin Peaks. I know he'd been in Twin Peaks. And there was, as it went on, there was a lot of kind of Twin Peaks cast members who'd pop up in the X-Files. And it always felt like, oh yeah, this is the new thing. This is like the new Twin Peaks. And being a massive fan of Twin Peaks when I was 11 or 12 when it first aired, I was like really up for the X-Files. Like, this is it. This is going to be the new Twin Peaks. It kind of had, I mean, I think that was probably I feel like that was deliberate. They would cast so many people from Twin Peaks. But that must have been like, I don't know how they sold it to networks. Maybe it was the very kind of British marketing that don't really know how to promote sci-fi series. So the nearest thing they can associate it with is they go, a bit like Twin Peaks. And you go, right, it's a bit weird. Yeah. Got some weird stuff.
Yeah. And this one in particular, because it has got that connection to the Thing, and they said it was directly influenced by the Thing. It's just a really great episode, isn't it? It's really like moves at, like they all do, moves at like lightning speed.
It's really fun. Yeah, the one we're talking about is Ice, isn't it? But not only is it directly influenced by The Thing. It so much is.
Yeah.
Like when I went, oh yeah, that's the one that's like The Thing. And when you watch it, you go, oh, it very much consciously is, right? There's no way that they could be thinking about it like, I was going, they must know. It must be on purpose.
Yeah.
They can't be doing a Thing rip-off not knowing that, like, hoping the audience don't recognise it. Because it so much is that.
Yeah, it's like Doctor Who now, isn't it? Which is like, wears its influences on its sleeve so much,
Yes.
that it's almost started like cannibalizing itself. Like it's become like Sherlock. With I mean, I don't watch Doctor Who that much, but with the relationship with the Master, and then Sherlock was sort of influenced by. Well, everything at the minute in the last sort of 20 years has been influenced by Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight and the relationship between the Batman and the Joker, and how that was played. And there's always like some villain who's like an element of chaos, and that's either Moriarty or it's the Master, or a myriad of pop culture things that have popped up. And that's like, it's again, it goes back to what can we sell? And we can sell this because people know what this is.
Yeah, it's a terrific episode. I mean, I didn't know how it almost made me think, like, I've realised that I remembered that I had all these on video and I had them in a little box.
Right.
So I bought these on video. So I think maybe the first series, maybe a bit less than that, I think I watched dozens of times, actually. And if you mentioned them to me, I'm sure I'd go, yeah, I know exactly that one. I can tell you exactly what happens in it. But it's like The X-Files is just not something I've even thought about. I know when they did the reboot thing, didn't they?
Yeah.
And I remember a few people I knew were saying, like, oh, you're watching The X-Files? And I was just like, no. And I watched, I watched it every week religiously. And it's almost that at some point I stopped watching. For a while, there was a thing about it, like, was it going to continue? And I remember, I think at some point, Gillian Anderson, she becomes pregnant. I think in real life and in the series. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think she's kind of written out because she's pregnant or she's having some sort of maternity leave while they're filming it. And then I remember there was the whole thing about Robert Patrick coming in. And I think I maybe saw one or two with Robert Patrick, and maybe that feels almost like, I don't know if that was the point where I just went, oh, I'm out. But I mean, at the same time, I've always liked Robert Patrick, so it would feel like, I don't know why I wouldn't watch a Robert Patrick one if that's who was taking over. I don't know quite how it all ended. That's it. It's like one of those series I never saw a conclusion of.
Yeah, right.
This episode was great, and it feels great for the era, and it feels great even now. It felt expensive. Like, the production values are great. It really all works. None of it feels like they're kind of making do with anything.
Well, they went over budget, I think. They originally set out for it to be like, oh, we're doing it like a bottle episode, and everybody is in one location, and we just need to save a bit of money here. And then it just went totally over budget. And they got, another connection with The Thing is they got the production designer of The Thing to do it. So he came on as like all the production designer with all the X-Files, and he's the guy who made The Thing look so great. So again, it's like it's another sort of tick on the references to that film.
And it's nice to see those kind of 90s character actors popping up in it. And you go, oh yeah, there's Xander Berkeley.
Great.
Felicity Huffman from Desperate Housewives.
Yes.
You've got Kenny Banyan from Seinfeld popping up. You've got the guy, and straight away, this is how much I realised I must have watched this loads of times at one point. As soon as the pilot turned up, my brain went, he's called Bear. And I knew before he said it, and I went, yeah, this guy's Bear. And he's this guy, you'd see him in loads of stuff as well. He was such a face on TV in that era. And he looks like Jim Morrison and Steven Tyler, as if they've kind of melted together.
Yeah.
They've gone through the Cronenberg's Fly Machine together.
Yeah, it's so good. And a couple of other, like, an episode, I don't know if it's later on, is like Marshall Bell's in it. And it's just like a tick box, like really great, like character actors who you just go, oh, I've seen that person.
Yeah.
I've seen that person.
And they've now sort of had these kind of, I mean, none of them are like massively famous necessarily, but they've just had they've had another 30 years of character parts on TV and film.
Yeah.
But so much so, when the director came up, because I went, of course, David Nutter, because it's one of those names that always amused me, who seem to always do the X-Files.
It does feel really well directed, actually.
Yeah, it does.
And then really taught, and really like this person knows exactly what they're doing and exactly how they're moving the camera.
That's what I thought.
Brilliant, because it could be, the script is fairly arch and fairly like hokey a lot of the time, like, you know, this whole thing about we are not who we are, and then them all saying like, oh, show us your documentation, who are you, we need to know who you are. That feels a bit like, well, people in real life don't actually speak like that.
Yes.
But you kind of go with it through sort of sheer, because the acting's so great, and now and now it's shot, and now the camera's moving, and you know, sheer sort of TV making, I think, is great.
Yeah. I thought that's the thing that really stood out for me, just how well made it was. And it made me think, oh, were they always like this? Or maybe he's particularly good at it. To the point where I read it and went, oh, did he go on to do movies or something? And it looks like he's just had, like, very successful, but like a long kind of TV career.
Yes.
But like, he was the name, just because he has a funny surname, his name always really stuck with me. So he's called David Nutter. That's what he's called, and he does the X-Files.
Yeah.
But yeah, that really impressed me. We're also used to like people talking about HBO and this sort of quality prestige TV that's around now. I wasn't expecting it to be as well made, and that kind of, when people talk about network TV in this kind of derogative sense, I wasn't expecting it to be so well put together. It was just like, God, this really works, and it's really smart, and it is telly, like, but it's like, it feels like it is made by someone who is a bit of a craftsman and knows exactly what they're doing. It doesn't feel like, and actually it's better directed than a lot of feature films are now. It's got more of a sense of the director is doing something. It doesn't have this sort of passive kind of, we'll just have this camera here kind of sort of indie filmmaking that you seem to have now. Yeah,
because I mean, even when it sort of reaches like fever pitch, you know, when everybody's shouting at each other, it still feels within the realms of like, well, you know, people would get to that point in that sort of pressure cooker situation, and you know, they've got to get from A to B in 45 minutes.
They get into the paranoid thing, felt too quickly, but you get it because you go, 45 minutes, I get it. I know we've got to get there immediately to the point where like they start shouting.
I mean, what I liked about this one as well is it's almost like Scully believes it.
Yes.
You know, she's very, very quick to go, right, I understand this, and it's from a medical point of view, and she's not the skeptic in this one. She's like, no, it's definitely something's afoot here, and you know, from a medical background, I understand that. Even if it has been frozen for like millennia, you know, we've got to stop this getting out, like it's a medical breach. So I thought that was different and nice to see her like that, rather than, you know, how many more times in 11 series can we ever go, Mulder, don't be so silly, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that was always the problem with it, wasn't it? We always felt like, well, you'd start believing it now, wouldn't you? If you see so much mad stuff, you would start going, he's onto something. I think this Mulder fella, he's not. There's something in it. Yeah, you're right, and it is because there's something physical about it, isn't there? There's something that she can deal with it because it's like there's evidence, and it's just this thing of it's a parasite. I know what a parasite is. I know what this thing is. I know it's this sort of, and there's like a virus that needs to be contained. So she's kind of in her element. And you're right. I guess it's Mulder who's much more like, I don't know. He's just more emotional, and he's dealing with it, and he's the one who's getting upset because he's just dealing with angry people.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess that is. I haven't had the benefit of watching the others before, I guess. So I'd kind of forgotten all that whole dynamic.
Do you feel like you will?
I'm worried about, I think all TV now feels like, everything feels like such a commitment. And it's like, How long did the X-Files run for? Like 9 years.
Yeah, 218 episodes.
Yikes.
So, best of luck to me with this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And I think you're right. I think as I got really into, I remember the kind of ongoing storyline and the kind of, so what's happened with Mulder's sister? Oh, there's the cigarette smoking man. There's but actually, in hindsight, it does feel like I think I would much rather watch the ones where it's Monster of the Week than I would the kind of ongoing storyline things that kind of suck you in. It's so familiar that it's really nice because it's like, and how much of it is just like, God, I forget how much I used to be into this and really love it. And like those episodes, particularly those early ones, I remember going, yeah, I had like the video, like a little box of them. I don't know, yeah. So I think I saw those kind of early ones loads. And there was that one that was banned. Do you remember that one? That was called Fire, was it called? Home. Oh. Was Fire that one?
Home was the one that was the one about basically inbreeding, the family who were...
Oh, yeah.
Who were all sleeping with each other.
Yes.
Yeah. But there was another one, wasn't there, with like, that got shown later on.
Yeah, they ended up doing an X-Files night and showing it late night X-Files, which was very exciting at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought the one that was banned was, maybe it wasn't. I thought it was that one that was called like Fire. And is it a kid who can sort of just create fire? I don't know. I think in my mind it was banned because there was a sort of element of that they saw it as like promoting that you might set your own house on fire or something, or kids might.
Right.
I thought it's one of those things where it's not, you sort of realise it wasn't actually banned for like, because it's too scary. It's sort of banned, I think, because they were like, oh, we're slightly worried about kids setting fire to their houses because loads of kids watch X-Files. Don't put that out at 9 o'clock. We can't have kids watching this thing about a boy who sets fire to things.
I'm interested to get to the point where I work with a guy he's about 15 years younger than I am, and he's obsessed with 9/11 and conspiracy theories around 9/11. So I'm interested to get to the point where the X-Files crosses over with 9/11, and does that, does any of that sort of that space and time affect what's going on in the X-Files or not? I'm interested to see.
Oh, good. I hadn't even thought of it still running then.
Yeah.
I guess it would have been, right? So what year did it start?
It started 93, and then I don't know what the break was, but when it came back, that was 2018. So yeah, definitely crossed over, because in one of the episodes in this season, it's the space one. It's like this. It's a bad episode. It's like an astronaut gets haunted and sort of possessed by an extraterrestrial ghost. They make reference to the Challenger disaster, and it's almost like I think it got a bit of stick at the time because it's almost a little bit distasteful.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It's like we're setting what it always does, try to set itself in the real world, and then you've got this weird extraterrestrial ghost flying around and changing people's faces with fairly bad early computer CGI,
Right. I don't remember that episode, but that feels very Nigel Nearly, doesn't it?
Yes.
That sort of concept. And wasn't he going to do one at one point? Was there a thing where he was commissioned to write one?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I have a feeling that happened. I don't think it ever materialised, but I think Chris Carter had tried to get him to commission him to write one. So I guess there's a bit of that in it as well. There's a bit of Quatermassy type stuff in them, and I mean, it's very. I was really struck by how good it was, and then there's a lot of my mind is going, oh yeah, you could watch all these again. And another part of me, it's like, I don't want another thing to watch. 200 episode thing, commitment to. But I'm really interested in the end of it now, how it all I'm interested in how it all wraps up, because it's like, it feels slightly unfinished. Like, so I'd be quite interested to watch these last few episodes, these last few series or whatever. I kind of do want to know how it all ends.
Believe Me is written and edited by me, Chris Boyd, with production support from Steve Marshall. music is by Johnny Boyle, and our logo is by Russ Brown. See you out there next time.